Yeah, I can talk a little bit about monasticism while we're waiting for Charlie to come back on. Um, so I visited the I've visited two monasteries in my life. The first was the monastery, the Holy Archangel Michael in Santa Fe, near Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the other is the Holy Archangels Monastery near Austin, which is a Greek monastery. It was a lot larger. Um, their chapel just felt it was extremely beautiful. It felt like things that I've seen in um, documentaries about Mount Athos, which is sort of the center of Orthodox monasticism. And the services there were all in Greek. I only did a day trip there, so that was my primary impression, was just like the beauty of the aesthetic language of the church, kind of cathedral feeling building. And I think one of the things that I thought about is just how appropriate it feels to like create beauty for the sake of God, for the sake of worshiping God. And that's something that in the West we don't have much of. Like the Catholic tradition has some of it. So yeah, Western uh, Christianity tends to be iconoclastic, um, and inheriting from some of the early people in the Protestant Reformation, there was a sense that the Catholics were putting too much emphasis on worldly wealth, and so they rebelled against that. And there was also sometimes I think there's also a fear of idolatry, so they don't want to include physical items in the worship of God. But when you encounter a tradition that has that physical beauty, I think it can speak to you in a language other than words. And apostolic Christianity, ancient Christianity, was a very full five sense kind of religion. Like you walk into one of these cathedrals, and it's just I have to compare it to something like Burning Man that's immersive. It puts you in another world, but this isn't another world that's geared towards hedonism. This is another world that's geared towards the worship of God, where the smell of the room, the size of the room, the feel of the room, and the sound of the room, the acoustics of the room, everything is set up to worship God. And so it takes worship out of being a mental discursive activity, and it puts it into a full sensory, five senses kind of activity. And I grew up in a Protestant church that was very iconoclastic, like a Jehovah's Witness church. They don't call them churches, but you go into one, and it's bare walls, maybe some wallpaper. They might have a scripture verse written on the wall, maybe some potted plants, but that's it. Like like a lot of the more low church Protestantism, which America is very much built on, feels like meeting rooms, like business meeting rooms. Like that's the design language. And there was something refreshing to me when I came to the Orthodox Church about having the like the just the beauty being used to worship God. It seemed right, and it seemed refreshing. And maybe it's just different. Maybe I'm just, to some extent, I think that there's some amount of just novelty to it for me, but it moves my heart. And I think it was that full sensory engagement that really speaks to me. Definitely in the monasteries of the church are places where the aesthetic language of the church is kept alive. And I think they're refreshing. They're good to go to. And I imagine, like, what would the world be like if we were? I wonder what effect iconoclasm in religion has had on Western culture, especially American culture. Like, so much of all the buildings in America were built after the Protestant Reformation. All the primary religious tradition of America is Protestantism, Anglicanism, Reformed Calvinism. Let's see, some Lutheran, not too much Lutherans. That was kind of later, but and we have spaces in America that are very utilitarian. They're like the idea. There's not a whole lot of ornamentation, especially in modern building. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that traces back to the iconoclasm of our religious tradition, or if it has to do with more with economic forces um, and building materials and how building engineering changes. But there is a way that America is very bare and utilitarian. Like we're highways and shopping malls. Like we invented that, and we don't invest as much into the ornamentation, like this idea that there can be a divine purpose to beauty. Um, like beauty is good in itself. It is not as baked into the American mentality, and I do find that frustrating. Um, and I feel a little thirsty, starved of uh, of beauty. So so I wonder, like engaging with beauty and worship in the church on a personal level, how that could affect my life. Like, could I let that somehow? Could that be the coal or the spark that I could use to like grow more beauty around me? Like as the Byzantine chant sinks into my soul, as the a- a- as the as I experience that in worship, like can I bring some of that design language into where I live? Um, but even in just like the patternicity of my life, like the way I spend my time, I think there's already uh, it's becoming more patterned and more beautiful because I do have the Sunday Eucharist, and I have the church year that revolves around um, Pascha, and and that provides a structure and a skeleton to time that it is a more beautiful way to live than to have just a mass of undifferentiated time, which is what I had before I started having the church to sort of pattern my life. It feels like Sunday church is like the bass drum that sort of beats the time in the song of my life. Um, and I think that is the and think that that is the start. That's a start of living a symphony instead of a mass of undifferentiated noise. Um, and so, and I think beauty can change the world around me too. Like it's more important to focus on my life first, because if you go around telling people that they're doing it wrong, especially when you're just figuring this stuff out, like I'm so excited about the changes I've made in my life over the last year that I just want to go and tell everybody how they're doing it wrong and they should be like me. But I know that I know nothing or very little. Like 5 years from now, I will know a lot more than I know now, and I'll still not know very much. So I've been thinking, like, giving my arrogance and my desire to like spread the things that I think are good to other people, like how to go about it. And I think beauty is the way to go about it. I think it's drawing people in through beauty. Um, I'll give an example of like one way that beauty can be like the way you so conservative when it comes to questions of abortion, and most religions are. When I was engaging with Tibetan Buddhism before, they're also very anti-abortion, which didn't go over so well actually with the other students in some of the classes that I went to. They're like, "What? We came here to meditate, not to be told that not to be faced with your Philistine backwards moral ideas." But the one thing that the church does is we participated in the Walk for Life in San Francisco, which is the second biggest pro-life march in the country and by far the biggest one on the West Coast. And we were there with a lot of religious groups of other denominations, and the signs they gave us said defund Planned Parenthood. So it was kind of like this angry confrontational march, and you're going through Market Street in San Francisco, um, which is a very confrontational place to be as pro-life people. San Francisco is very much not a pro-life town. And so I was thinking, like, if it's basically just like a big fuck you to all these progressive San Francisco people. And I agree that like human life should be given value even in the womb. But I just thought like the way we were going about it was all wrong. I'm like, what would actually be effective? And I think beauty is actually effective, like music, especially like the music of the church. Even if it's not about that topic, it just softens your heart. It brings up feelings of love. It brings up feelings of sadness, and it's hard to listen to um, beautiful music and then be cruel to someone. It's hard to listen to something beautiful and then hurt someone. And so I think what would be a lot more effective than the way the pro-life movement currently goes about things would be standing outside abortion clinics and just singing a cappella Byzantine chant. Like, just make people cry on their way in. And that will touch their heart in a non-confrontational way. Like, I think you would change more minds. I think you'd touch more hearts than like just telling people they're doing it wrong. And that for me is a microcosm of what I think is a effective activism. Like, if I'm right about what's good and what's beautiful, then I should be able to produce beauty. Like, that is the test. Like, that is how you can tell if the fruit is good. And then like maybe I do a little signal boosting to show people the beautiful things I'm making, but um like you use that as bait, as a lure to draw people in to what you think is good. And if you can't make beauty and you still think you're right, you have to like sit back and ask yourself, like, is this really like the fruits of what I think are good aren't so good? Maybe I'm doing things wrong.